welcome to another episode in the Criminal Calendar. We're going to be less mysterious than adventurous today because we have with us Bernard Cornwell. Hi, Bernard.
Thank you, Barbara.
Author of, he says 37 novels, but I'm not sure it's not more. I started to count when I got to your website today. For those of you who care, it's bernardcornwell.com. And maybe best known for the Sharp series, which I counted 19 books.
There are 19. I've just started the 20th.
So Sharp's Havoc, which is in fact this one, is the most recent.
That's the new one, yes. And it's set in 1809, which is actually where the series started. And I've done a completely daft thing, which is I wrote one series of Sharp books, which began in 1809 and went on to 1815. And I thought that was it. I thought there'd be no more books. And then, of course, the TV series came in Britain.
Right.
And we started another series. And that one began in 1799. And that one is now caught up to the first series. So I have the problem of sort of jigsawing the two together.
Actually, I think it's worked out pretty well. In Sharp's Havoc, they have listed the books not in the order you wrote them, but in the order of the events. And I think Sharp's Havoc actually falls number 7 because we're in 1809.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Well, I looked it up, so I'm prepared. But anyway, I think it did. And as a matter of fact, I really enjoyed the idea that you had, started in what, 1981 with the first two?
Yes, the first one was published in 81, yeah.
And you moved ahead reasonably quickly to Waterloo, which is the end of this huge conflict. But then, to redo it, you've gone back to India, and I don't know how many of our viewers realize that the Duke of Wellington, then Sir Arthur Wellesley, really made his name in India.
Yeah, well, I don't see why any of your viewers should know it. It seems an extraordinary arcane piece of knowledge. But yeah, he learned his trade in India. And the Sharp books in many ways shadow Wellington's career.
Exactly.
So wherever Wellington is, Sharp is there, and they have a rather sort of on-off relationship, the two of them. But I suppose that the salient thing about Sharp is that he's up from the ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And most Americans seem to think that the British Army was sort of officered by aristocrats. And this simply isn't true. There would have been maybe 1% of the officers were aristocrats, and most of them would be in the guards or in the cavalry, where brains don't really matter. Most of the officers were middle class. I mean, they're either the sons of country gentry or tradespeople. But about 6 or 7% by 1815 had come up from the ranks. And I guess that's the most important thing about Sharp, is that he's come up from the ranks. And to be promoted from the ranks to an officer, you had to have 3 qualifications. You had to be a sergeant, you had to be able to read and write, and you then had to perform an act of almost suicidal bravery. And
on the field?
On the field. And Sharp's act of suicidal bravery is to save Wellington's life. And curiously, it's an event that's in the second book of the series, yes, which is Sharp's, I can never remember, Sharp's Triumph.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually based on an event that really did happen, but I won't say what it was.
Oh, and you substituted Sharp for...
Well, we don't know.
Or added him in?
Well, what actually happened was that Wellesley, as he then was on a battlefield called Assay, and he had to get from one side of the battlefield to the other, and he ran into an awful lot of trouble. His horse was piked. He came off the horse. He fell right among the enemy. We know it was the one occasion in which he drew a sword to defend himself on a battlefield, but he would never talk about what happened. And it took about 2 minutes for him to be rescued, so he was probably fighting for 2 minutes, but he would never, ever say what went on in those 2 minutes. So I thought, all right, let's put Sharp in there.
Well, that's the point of fiction, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
yes.
So you can imagine it. But back to your comment about officers, I don't know that how we think of the Army as a draft after World War II, but what we don't realize, I think, back in the time you're talking about, is that oftentimes, or at least some officers, bought commissions. It was something you did for, what, younger sons? And
It seems quite extraordinary, doesn't it? Yes. It was purchased, commissioned by purchase.
Right.
And the lowest rank in the Army was ensign, which would be the equivalent of a second lieutenant in the second lieutenant, in the American Army today. And to become a second lieutenant, you paid 550 guineas, which is an enormous amount of money.
It was.
I mean, you're talking up to $100,000. I mean, it really was an enormous amount of money. And you then served 3 years, and you could then buy a lieutenancy, which cost £1,500 or 1,500 guineas. But of course, you could sell your ensigncy for the 550 that you paid, so it only cost you 950, whatever it was. It does seem extraordinary, doesn't it? And you could then buy a captaincy, and you could buy a majority. You couldn't purchase above that. Once you were a major,
right.
That was it. After that, it was seniority. I mean, the whole system is utterly ridiculous, but it did actually produce Wellington, who is arguably the greatest, if he's certainly one of the 5 greatest soldiers ever. I mean, let's not get into that one, but it was a daft system. Not all the officers were purchased. Obviously, Sharp couldn't purchase, and if he had that much money, he wouldn't spend it on that. He'd spend it on wine, women, and song. But so there was about 20% of the slots actually were open to merit. But most of it was purchased, and it does seem absolutely ridiculous.
Well, it does in a sense, but on the other hand, you know, if you think about it, in that old saw, you know, there was the heir, and the spare was often the military,
spare, yes.
Or the third son, and then, you know, the youngest son was usually some sort of church, you know, because vicar. I mean, I don't think it's any dafter than the fact that the church was a gift of.
Well, this is exactly what happened to Wellington. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there were 4 brothers. Henry went to, well, the eldest was Richard. He was going to be set up as the heir to the earldom. And he did, in fact, get the Earl, was the Earl of Mornington. Then there was, I can't remember the order now, Henry went into the church. I think one did become a lawyer. And Arthur was thought to be too thick for anything, so was put into the army. His mother always said he wasn't clever enough for anything else. And the family is still, I think there's still some slight tension between the 2 sides of the family, because Arthur becomes a duke, and of course a duke outranks an earl. And
That's right.
so I'm told that in fact the Morningtons don't talk much to the Wellingtons.
How fascinating! And I recall that he was an Irish family, wasn't it?
Well, Wellington said he was born in Dublin, and he said just because a man is born in a stable, it doesn't make him a horse.
Ah.
So I don't know, you make of what you will of that. He would never have considered himself Irish. The title was certainly Anglo-Irish, so they would call themselves Anglo-Irish. They're Dublin ascendancy gentry, so they're Protestant, they look back to England, and the Irish have never really claimed Wellington as one of their own.
Okay, so what I was thinking is wasn't he serving before this book? Wasn't he actually in Ireland?
Yes, he grew up mostly in England. He went to Eton. After Eton, he went to Angers in France, where he learned French, and that was a military college. He then basically follows a career in the military, but which takes him to Dublin for a time. But again, that was simply, he was part of, I guess you'd say, the garrison in Dublin. And from there, he had a brief service in Flanders, which didn't go particularly well, back to London, then off to India.
The British equivalent of West Point today is Sandhurst, but was that in existence?
Oh
at
no,
this
there was no
time?
training for officers. Oh no, that was thought to be quite
right.
absolutely unnecessary. Gunnery officers, artillery officers did get training at Woolwich, I mean, because they had to add up and so on. Naval officers got training on the job, and in the Royal Navy, promotion was by examination and merit. Although once you got to a certain level, it went by seniority. And the great problem, of course, with seniority is that you're liable to have lots of morons choking up the system. So that, for instance, when they wanted Nelson to actually take over the Mediterranean fleet, they had to promote 108 men above him so that he could get to the right rank. And the same thing happened to Wellington when he was first sent to the peninsula. They had to promote about 50 or 60 men and get them out of the way so that he could then be the top dog for that job. But no, there was no training. The first staff college opened during the Peninsular War. In fact, that was run by a Frenchman in a pub in Hampstead, and all the tuition was in French, and it's said that after the first 2 hours of the morning he was so drunk that it didn't really matter anyway. But no, there was no professional training for most army officers till well after Waterloo.
So in a sense, while it was tragic in some respects, something like the whole struggle, the Napoleonic Wars, was a time of great opportunity for those who actually survived, that they could be promoted.
Yes. Oh, it was a wonderful time for promotion. I mean, dead men's shoes. I mean,
Right.
this was a war that began in 1793 and went on with only a couple of short breaks to 1815. So yes, there was an immense amount of promotion.
Plus, a lot more chances for battlefield
Oh, yeah, war is
heroics.
good for promotion of soldiers. I mean, you prayed for a long war.
I think it's interesting the way Sharp, career does move along through all this.